They fired me in front of everyone at 2:58 p.m. I never imagined my 14 years at Silverline Dynamics would end with my new operations director pointing at me in the middle of the command room and announcing my job was no longer necessary. The entire floor went silent. 26 people watched me absorb a humiliation I didn't deserve. I stood there, stunned, while he told me I could pack my things whenever I was done. What he didn't realize was that some knowledge can't be replaced, and some losses come back with consequences. If this kind of betrayal hits home, subscribe and tell me your story in the comments. For most of my career, I believed loyalty still meant something in corporate America. I spent 14 years inside Silverline Dynamics, shaping the one thing the company couldn't buy, outsource, or bluff its way through: a stable, hard-working operations culture that kept our routing network moving across 10 million endpoints a day. I didn't come from prestige or pedigree. I built my reputation from emergencies survived, systems rescued, and teams trained through real pressure. When I walked into Silverline at 29, I was a mid-level analyst with a borrowed laptop and a habit of asking why every process worked the way it did. By 43, I had become the person everyone called when a system stuttered at midnight or a routing cluster buckled during peak season. I knew every operational blind spot, every undocumented shortcut, every vendor quirk that could topple an entire distribution region if handled the wrong way. I didn't rise because I played politics. I rose because people trusted me, and trust in operations is the only currency that doesn't evaporate under stress. My team, 26 architects, analysts, and systems engineers, wasn't just a department. We were a living network of habits, instincts, and unspoken knowledge built over a decade of real crisis work. We didn't lose people. We didn't make excuses. We didn't panic. We understood each other in ways no slide deck or onboarding manual could ever teach. The executives liked to brag about our 99.7% operational stability, our record delivery success rate, our year-over-year savings. But the truth was simpler. The team stayed because they trusted my leadership, and the network stayed alive because they trusted each other. That was the quiet truth behind every metric Silverline displayed in glossy investor briefings. I never flaunted my role, never told anyone I held that invisible thread together. But everyone on the operations floor knew. They saw the patterns I caught before escalation, the calls I answered on holidays, the decisions I made in seconds because I'd already lived some version of the problem 5 times before. They knew I shielded them from reckless directives and bridged the gap between executives who only spoke in buzzwords and operators who lived in real-world consequences. I wasn't perfect, but I was present. I showed up. I remembered birthdays. I stepped into the trenches when the work turned ugly. My office didn't even have a door. I preferred to sit in the command room, headset on, listening to the pulse of the system like it was a living thing. People said it made them feel grounded. Maybe that's why the team rarely left. We had only 2 resignations in 7 years, both due to spouses relocating out of state. In an industry where turnover churned like a washing machine, we were the exception everyone tried to imitate. That's what made the betrayal so hard to digest later. Not just the dismissal, but the deliberate erasure of everything we'd built. I wasn't just managing workflows, I was holding together the institutional memory the entire network depended on. And still, it took one man with a title and a script to pretend none of it mattered. At the time, I didn't know how fast his mistake would unravel everything. I only knew the team felt the ground shift weeks before I did. When Maxwell Drayton arrived at Silverline Dynamics, the first thing he did was shake everyone's hand like a politician, campaigning for votes he assumed he already had. He wore tailored suits that never wrinkled, spoke in rehearsed sound bites, and used phrases like strategic recalibration and operational fluidity, as if repeating them enough times would magically improve our routing network. People like him never worried about understanding how anything actually worked. They didn't need to. Their authority came stamped on their title and echoed back at them by people too afraid to challenge the facade. I watched him during his first week, drifting through the command room with that distant executive gaze, curious but detached, like he was touring a museum instead of walking the floor that held our entire national logistics backbone together. He asked questions that told me everything. Why can't we automate human intuition? Why is the team so reliant on undocumented processes? Why isn't everything modular? He didn't understand that operations wasn't a tech toy. It was muscle memory, accumulated experience, and dozens of small, informal safeguards built over years of trial and error. But Maxwell came in convinced he had to reshape the department to leave his mark. Some executives lead by learning. Others lead by disrupting what they don't understand. Maxwell belonged firmly in the second group. He introduced changes at a dizzying pace, rearranging team assignments, rebranding processes with trendy names, and pushing a self-directed pod structure he'd picked up from a conference keynote. He kept describing it as a revolutionary shift, when it was really just a poorly disguised attempt to dismantle a system that wasn't broken. The more he talked, the more I realized he viewed my experience as a threat, not an asset. He didn't say it outright, but I saw it in small moments, in meetings, where he interrupted me to rephrase my explanation into buzzwords, in hallway conversations where he praised the team's potential instead of acknowledging their actual achievements, in the way he studied my reactions as if waiting for me to resist so he could label me non-adaptable. My team felt the tension immediately. They weren't used to a leader who avoided responsibility and leaned on jargon like a shield. They were used to clarity, honesty, and direct problem-solving, things Maxwell treated like outdated relics. Still, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I explained the network's quirks, warned him about fragile dependencies, and walked him through the high-risk windows when rerouting changes should never be made. But the more I talked, the more impatient he became. He didn't want history, context, or nuance. He wanted transformation he could take credit for. He wanted results that photographed well. Everything about him signaled that he was following a script. And unfortunately, that script didn't include listening to the people who kept the system functioning. 2 weeks before everything fell apart, he called me into his glass-walled office overlooking the operations floor. "Valeria," he said, folding his hands like he was about to deliver wisdom, "your leadership has been effective, but we need to adopt a more modern mindset. The industry is changing, and we need to change with it." Modern mindset. Those words were the warning shot I should have paid more attention to. They usually precede decisions made for appearance, not results. I asked for specifics, what wasn't working, which outcomes he felt needed adjustment, but he only repeated the same vague phrases. "We must lean into decentralized authority," he insisted. "Operators need to take ownership without relying on legacy guidance." Legacy guidance, that was the first time he used the term. It wouldn't be the last. I walked out of that meeting with a pit in my stomach. Maxwell didn't just misunderstand operations. He fundamentally rejected the idea that experience mattered. And when a leader refuses to value the people who stabilize a company, the next step is always predictable. They replace them. Except he didn't replace me quietly. He wanted an audience. He wanted theater. He wanted a moment that proved he was the new force shaping Silverline's future. And he would get it, just not the outcome he expected. The day it happened began so normally that I still replay it in my head, trying to pinpoint the second where everything shifted. I arrived a little before 2, coffee in hand, ready for our mid-afternoon routing review. Wednesdays were usually predictable, minor adjustments, a few vendor escalations, the usual pre-peak jitters, but nothing out of the ordinary. My team was scattered across the command room, screens glowing with live routing maps. I felt the energy, the steady, familiar rhythm of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Then at 2:53 p.m., Maxwell appeared in the doorway, holding a folder like a prop. Something in the air changed. The room stiffened. He scanned the floor with a brightness that felt artificial, polished, too rehearsed. "Everyone, can I have your attention?" he said, loud enough to cut through the ambient noise. Heads lifted, keyboards paused, even the routing graph alert seemed quieter. I stepped forward automatically, thinking he wanted to clarify some change he'd pushed earlier in the week. Instead, he motioned for the entire team to gather near the center of the command room. 26 people formed a loose circle around him. I stood to the side at first, trying to catch his eye, but he didn't look at me. He looked past me, through me, like I was a formality he'd already crossed out in his mind. "Thank you all," he began, voice smooth, confident in a way only someone insulated from consequences could sound. "As you know, I was brought in to modernize Silverline Dynamics' operational structure and drive a new era of efficiency." My stomach tightened. I'd heard this speech, some version of it, 10 times in meetings, casual conversations, and the half-smirk he wore whenever he talked about outdated practices. But standing here, in front of the full team, it felt different. Too performative. Too staged. After evaluating our workflows, he continued, "It's clear we need to shift toward a decentralized, pod-driven framework." A few people exchanged glances. We all knew what decentralization meant. Dilution of responsibility with no clear owner. A structure that worked beautifully in theory and collapsed spectacularly in real conditions. "Effective immediately," Maxwell said, his voice cutting cleanly through the tension. "We're eliminating the systems program director role." He paused, letting the sentence land. It took a beat for the words to sink in. A couple of my team members looked confused, turning toward me like they needed confirmation they'd heard correctly. Eliminating the systems program director role. My role, after 14 years, without warning, without discussion, without dignity. Maxwell finally looked at me, eyes cool and almost triumphant. "Valeria," he said, "thank you for your service to Silverline Dynamics. You've contributed a great deal." My heart thudded hard enough that I could feel it in my fingertips. I opened my mouth to speak, but he continued before I could. "HR has prepared your transition package and they'll reach out to you shortly. You can pack up your things whenever you're done here." A hush fell over the room, stunned, heavy, disbelieving. My team had seen me handle breakdowns, vendors screaming, regional outages that could cripple entire states, but they had never seen me blindsided. Not like this. "Maxwell," I said quietly, "this is a conversation we should be having in private." He lifted his chin, voice dripping with self-righteousness. "Transparency is important. Hiding decisions behind closed doors is part of the outdated mentality we're moving away from." Outdated mentality, legacy thinking. There it was again, that blind arrogance wrapped in the language of innovation. I looked around the room. I saw Marcus, eyes wide with disbelief. I saw Elena biting her lip. I saw Samir shift uncomfortably, hands tightening at his sides. These were people who had followed me through every crisis, people who had trusted my judgment for years, and now they were watching me be cut down in the most humiliating way possible. Something inside me settled, quiet and cold. "Understood," I said. It was the only word I could form without shaking. Maxwell nodded as if I'd confirmed a brilliant decision on his part. "Great, let's move forward," he said, already turning back to the floor plan on the screen, as if he hadn't just detonated the core of the entire department. I stepped back, resisting the urge to run my hands through my hair, resisting the instinct to defend myself. I knew better than to argue with a man committed to proving a point he didn't understand, but what Maxwell failed to realize, what he could not possibly grasp in that moment, was that the humiliation he delivered so casually would not break me. It would break the entire system he believed he was improving, and the cost of that lesson would be far greater than he could ever imagine. When the circle of people slowly dissolved and returned to their stations, I felt the strange sensation of standing inside my own life while it shifted into something unrecognizable. My face felt hot, but my voice stayed level when I told Maxwell, "I'll gather my things." He nodded without looking at me, already performing competence he didn't possess. I walked toward my desk, knowing every step was being watched, not out of judgment, but shock. My workspace sat near the large west-facing windows, the spot I'd claimed years earlier because it let me keep an eye on the whole floor. Today, the sunlight felt harsher than usual, almost theatrical, illuminating every item I'd collected over 14 years. The coffee mug my team gave me after we survived the worst winter surge on record. The small stack of notebooks filled with scribbled observations, undocumented fixes, vendor quirks, and crisis patterns I'd learned the hard way. A few photos from holiday shifts and milestone nights where we'd made miracles happen with too few people and too much pressure. I touched none of it, because none of it mattered now, not in the way that counted. I didn't want to carry pieces of a place that no longer respected the work behind them. Instead, I reached for the 5 things that represented the version of myself still intact: my laptop, my notebook with current work, my headphones, my phone, and the mug with fading letters that read, "Keep the routes running." That mug had outlasted 5 regional reorganizations, 2 CEOs, and 3 winter storms that nearly shut down half the country. I didn't plan to leave it behind. I placed the 5 items neatly inside a small cardboard box I found under my desk. It took less than 3 minutes, 14 years reduced to a single slow breath of time. People say the end of a career feels like free fall. For me, it felt like clarity, a sudden, concentrated understanding that the place I had given my loyalty no longer deserved it. When I turned toward the elevator, I expected the room to blur into background noise. Instead, I saw movement. Marcus rising from his chair so abruptly, his headset nearly fell off. Then Elena followed, then Samir, then 2 more senior analysts. They didn't speak. They just stood up, almost instinctively, and walked toward me. A cluster of familiar faces, all wearing the same expression. Disbelief sharpened into something protective. We met by the elevator bank, out of Maxwell's line of sight. I could feel 26 hearts pounding with the same question. Marcus spoke first, his voice low. "Valeria, what was that?" The pain in his expression hit harder than the humiliation had. "He eliminated my role," I said gently, effective immediately. Samir shook his head. "That's not elimination. That was a hit job." "It doesn't matter what we call it," I replied. "It's done." Elena stepped closer, voice trembling with anger. "He doesn't understand half the things you do. None of us would even know this system without you." I glanced at the clock, 3:01 p.m., 3 minutes after the moment my career had been erased in front of the people who built it with me. "Listen," I said, keeping my tone steady. "What happened today tells us exactly how leadership values our institutional experience. That's information you all have the right to consider." They exchanged looks again, hurt, anger, fear, loyalty, fighting confusion. But behind all of it, I saw something else forming: decision. And that decision would ignite the firestorm Maxwell never saw coming. The elevator doors hadn't even closed yet when Marcus stepped forward, lowering his voice like he was trying to protect me from another blow. "Tell me you're not just walking away with nothing," he said. It wasn't accusation, it was fear. Fear of losing the person who made the chaos manageable. Fear of what a place like Silverline would become without someone who understood how everything fit together. I took a steady breath. This was the moment I had kept quiet for almost a year, the contingency I never wanted to use, but always knew might save me if things ever turned ugly. "I'm not walking away with nothing," I said. "I've had a standing offer from Novaspan for 12 months, Executive Director of Operations Architecture. I turned them down 3 times because I wasn't ready to leave you." The silence that followed was powerful enough to feel in my chest. Elena blinked hard. Samir's shoulders dropped like he'd been holding tension for months. Even 2 junior analysts nearby stopped pretending they weren't listening. "You had an offer? For a year?" Marcus asked, tone shifting from shock to something close to awe. "They wanted me to build their entire operations backbone," I said softly. "And last month, they reminded me the offer was still open, if I ever decided I'd had enough." Samir let out a breath that sounded like relief and grief tangled together. "So what now? You take it?" "I'm calling them tonight," I said. "I start Monday if the role is still mine." A ripple of reactions moved through the group: anger, admiration, but mostly clarity. "Valeria," Elena said, stepping closer, "if Novaspan is building from scratch, do they have room for experienced analysts?" The question hit like electricity. Then another voice joined. "What about lead architects?" Then another. Would they consider someone with regional routing experience? I looked at the faces surrounding me, people who had spent years giving this company everything: holidays, weekends, sleep, pride. People Maxwell had just insulted by pretending the work they did wasn't worth protecting. Novaspan needs people who understand real operations, I said honestly. People who know how to handle live routing pressure, not just talk about it. So, us, Marcus said. Yes, I replied without hesitation. You. No one moved at first, but I could feel the tension shifting. You don't need to command loyalty when people have already decided where they stand. Valeria, Samir said, rubbing his forehead. I don't want to stay here without you. He doesn't know what he's doing. None of this is going to work. You each have to make your own choices, I said firmly. Leaving is big. Leaving together is bigger. But what happened today isn't just about me. It's about what leadership just told all of you. Marcus's jaw tightened. They told us experience is disposable. Exactly, I said quietly. And you deserve better. My phone buzzed, a text from one of the junior engineers. Is it true? Are you really gone? Please tell me you're okay. Another buzz, then another. Word was spreading faster than any announcement Maxwell could have made. I looked at the group. If you're serious about exploring Novaspan, I said, send me your resumes tonight. I'll talk to their CTO before 6. Marcus didn't need time to think. You'll have mine within the hour. Elena nodded. Mine too. Then Samir, then the others. As the elevator finally arrived and opened, I stepped inside and turned back to them. The floor behind them was still bustling, unaware that the ground had already begun to crack. Whatever you decide, I said, you don't owe this place your loyalty if it can't respect what you give. The doors began to slide shut. But just know, change is coming. And they believed me. I could see it in their eyes, the moment a team chooses its leader over its company. By the time I walked out of the building, the anger had settled into something sharper. Clarity. I sat in my car for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around me, and opened my phone to dial Novaspan's CTO. He picked up on the second ring, and the relief in his voice was instant. Valeria, please tell me this means what I think it means. If the offer's still open, I said, I can start Monday. It's open, he replied without hesitation. Come tomorrow morning at 9. We'll finalize everything. I exhaled slowly. One more thing, I may have referrals, good ones. How many are we talking, he asked. Potentially 20, maybe more. A beat of silence, then, bring them. I ended the call, stared at the steering wheel, and tried to process that my life had shifted in the span of one afternoon. I was ready to go home, take off my badge, and let the day hit me all at once, until Marcus's name lit up on my screen. It was 5:52 p.m. Routing engine failing. Maxwell has no idea. Junior staff freaking out. 4 minutes later, it's cascading. Eastern region is misrouting. Payment confirmations failing. My chest tightened. The exact failure pattern he described, I'd seen it dozens of times. The routing optimization engine had a known weak point whenever vendor batch loads spiked too quickly. I had a fix, undocumented, tested only under my supervision, a sequence of recalibrations and cache warming steps that worked every time I used them. But Maxwell never bothered to learn it, and he'd never asked the team how to handle it. Another text from Marcus. He refused to call you, told us to figure it out. We can't fix this blind. I could picture it perfectly. Maxwell standing in the middle of the command room with that stiff posture he thought looked authoritative, refusing to admit he was drowning. I didn't wish failure on the team. I wished competence on the leadership. But Silverline had made its choice, and now they were finally meeting the cost of that choice. At 6:34 p.m., Elena texted. Customers complaining on social, regions timing out. Ops floor is chaos. Then Samir. He's blaming legacy processes. We're trying to stabilize, but it's getting worse. I shouldn't have looked, but part of me couldn't resist the instinct to check the live status page. Red. Everywhere red. Entire segments of the network looked like they were bleeding. I could fix this in 20 minutes, I thought. But 20 minutes of knowledge meant nothing to someone who thought I was expendable. By 7:10 p.m., the tone shifted. Marcus again. This is getting catastrophic. Maxwell is calling it a data hiccup. CFO is pacing. Then at 7:31 p.m., a call came through. Not from Maxwell, from Elaine Porter, the CFO. Her voice trembled with urgency. Valeria, I'm so sorry to call you. We have a major situation. The routing system is failing across multiple regions. We need your help. Elaine, I said calmly, I was terminated 3 hours ago and replaced with a structure that doesn't need my guidance. I know, she said quickly, but we're losing revenue by the minute. Vendors are threatening to pull. Customers are blasting us online. We need you. Just walk the team through the fix. I can't, I said. I'm no longer an employee, and I'm starting at Novaspan on Monday. We'll pay you. She rushed. Consulting rates, emergency premium, name your price. The desperation in her voice almost made me pity her. Almost. It's not about money, I said. It's about the fact that Maxwell chose to eliminate the knowledge he now needs. Silence stretched across the line. What would it take to get you back? She finally whispered. That's not an option, I replied, but you should prepare for resignations, a lot of them. Valeria, how many? Most of the senior team, I said truthfully, and some of the juniors. Her breath caught. This can't be happening. But it was, and it had been set in motion the moment Maxwell performed that little show in the middle of the command room. The call ended at 7:39 p.m. I refreshed the status page again. Now even the rollback attempts were failing. By 9:12 p.m., Marcus texted. He's still refusing to admit he's lost control. Everyone's exhausted. I stared at the screen, feeling that strange mixture of sorrow and inevitability that comes when something collapses exactly the way you warned it would. The truth was simple. Maxwell had fired the only person who knew how to hold the system together. And now, he was discovering what a world without that knowledge actually looked like. By the next morning, the story had already spread far beyond the operations floor. I woke up to a flood of messages, more than 50, from team members, vendors, even a few people from departments I barely interacted with. Some were checking on me, others were furious on my behalf, but most were asking the same question: are you really leaving? I hadn't planned to respond to any of them right away. I wanted a quiet morning before the next storm hit, but the storm didn't wait for me. At 8:13 a.m., Marcus sent a screenshot of his resignation email, drafted and ready, with the cursor hovering over send. The message read, due to recent organizational changes and a work environment that no longer supports sustainable operational integrity, I am formally resigning, effective immediately. Under it, a text from him appeared. I'm sending this at 8:47, just giving you a heads up. I stared at the screen for a long moment, not out of surprise, but out of the weight of what it meant. He wasn't walking out. He was tearing out the backbone of the entire system by leaving. At 8:47 on the dot, another message came. Sent. Then Elena's. Mine too. Then Samir's. Then 2 senior analysts. Then 3 architects. Then the night shift supervisor. By 10:00 a.m., 11 resignations had landed. By noon, 15. Every time my phone buzzed, another piece of Silverline's foundation cracked. Meanwhile, inside the company, Maxwell was scrambling to regain control, though control had never been something he truly had. An operator who still remained messaged me discreetly around 12:30 p.m. He's calling the resignations expected restructuring attrition. He's trying to spin it like this is planned. Planned? Silverline had spent years bragging about industry-leading retention. What happened in the span of 4 hours was not attrition. It was evacuation. And no amount of corporate spin could hide that the people leaving weren't random staffers. They were the people who built the system, the ones who knew its contour, its weaknesses, its rhythms, the ones Silverline couldn't replace even if they tried. At 2:10 p.m., Maxwell held an emergency meeting with the 3 remaining junior employees, not to understand what had happened, not to reflect on the choices that led here, but to reassure them, with all the confidence of a man still clinging to delusion, that the team would be even stronger after rebuilding with modern thinkers. I almost felt sorry for those juniors. They were being promised a future that no longer existed. Silverline wasn't building anything. It was bleeding out, and the person holding the knife still believed he ran the OR. Around 3:40 p.m., Elaine, the CFO who had begged for my help the night before, called again. I let it ring twice before answering. "Valeria," she said in a breathless whisper, "I need to give you an update." "Let me guess," I said. "Another outage?" "Worse," she replied. "The rollback never fully stabilized. We're seeing escalations from our largest carriers. They want guarantees we can't give." "You're paying for the decision you made," I said gently. She sighed, defeated. "I know. I'm not calling to ask you to come back. I know that isn't happening. I'm calling because this morning someone showed me the resignation count. 19. 19 people gone. Do you understand what that means for us?" Of course I understood, better than anyone, but I didn't need to say it aloud. She already knew. "We trusted the wrong person," she whispered, and that was the truth. Not that they trusted Maxwell, but that they trusted a narrative where leadership mattered more than expertise. "Elaine," I said softly, "this didn't happen overnight. He dismantled the structure without knowing what held it together." "We're estimating millions in losses already," she said. "Possibly more after the weekend. I wish we'd heard you sooner." Wish. Such a lightweight word for such a heavy consequence. "I hope you find a way to stabilize things," I told her. She hesitated. "Valeria, I know this won't change anything, but for what it's worth, I'm sorry." "I know," I replied, "but some lessons cost too much to repeat." After the call ended, I sat quietly, letting the gravity of what had happened settle. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't triumph. It was inevitability. The moment they fired me publicly, they lit a fuse they couldn't unlight. When you remove the person who understands the invisible wiring of an entire system, that system doesn't gradually weaken. It collapses. And Silverline was now learning that collapse from the inside out. By the end of the day, 19 resignations were confirmed. 19 out of 26. A company can survive many wounds. But when you lose the people who understand the heartbeat of your entire operation, there is no recovery. Not from that. Silverline hadn't just lost a team. They had lost the future they thought they controlled. On Monday morning, when I walked through Novaspan's glass doors, something in me lifted that I hadn't realized was carrying so much weight. The air felt different, lighter, like I was stepping into a place that understood the value of experience rather than trying to erase it. Their CTO met me in the lobby, shook my hand like an equal, and introduced me to the team I would be leading, a group excited, eager, and unafraid to admit what they didn't know. It was the opposite of Silverline's slowly cracking facade. Within 3 days, 12 of my former team members had officially joined. By the end of the second week, we were 21 strong, rebuilding a new operations backbone with the kind of trust that can't be forced, only earned. Novaspan didn't ask me to justify my methods or prove my worth by sacrificing my team's stability. They wanted results built on real foundations. They wanted leadership grounded in reality, not buzzwords. And in return, they gave us the freedom to architect systems the right way, intentionally, responsibly, sustainably. Our first major routing rollout went live in early November. No theatrics, no last-minute panics, no collapsing under pressure. Just a clean, steady transition followed by a month of near-flawless performance. As Novaspan grew, winning contracts that Silverline had once assumed were theirs by default, I kept one reminder on my desk. The old mug etched with "Keep the Roots Running." It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a monument to revenge. It was a reminder that systems don't succeed because someone talks loudly about innovation. They succeed because people who understand them work quietly, consistently, and with respect for the knowledge behind them. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regretted leaving, if I wished I had fought harder to stay, but the truth is simple. I didn't walk away from Silverline. Silverline walked away from the experience that held its entire network together. I just took the people who knew the truth with me. In the end, what happened at Silverline taught me something I didn't fully understand while I was living it. Not every battle is worth fighting on someone else's battlefield. I spent years believing loyalty guaranteed safety, that hard work protected you, and that being the steady hand in the storm meant people would value your presence. But experience doesn't mean anything to leaders who refuse to recognize it. What matters is knowing when your worth is being dismissed and having the courage to step toward places that will honor it. My story isn't about destroying a company or watching someone drown in consequences. It's about realizing that when people show you they don't value what you bring, your silence, your exit, and your success somewhere else can speak louder than any confrontation ever could. Sometimes forgiveness sets you free, but sometimes walking away without a word forces people to face the truth they tried to ignore. That isn't cruelty. That's clarity. If there's one practical lesson I'd offer anyone navigating corporate life today, it's this. Document your wins, guard your reputation, build genuine relationships, and never tie your identity to a company that treats people as replaceable parts. Don't wait for catastrophe to remind you of your own value. Pay attention to the small signs. Dismissive comments, performative leadership, decisions made without input from those doing the real work. These patterns repeat, and they rarely end well. When they show up, give yourself permission to explore new paths before you're forced to. How to get started today. Write down 3 strengths you bring to your workplace that no one can take from you. Update your resume and LinkedIn, even if you're not planning to leave. Reach out to one professional connection you haven't spoken to in months. Seeds planted today become exits you may rely on tomorrow. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Pass it along to someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that speak the truth about loyalty, leadership, and life.